All right. So Liaquat Ali Khan was the first Prime Minister of Pakistan, and his ministry, the reign for his ministry was 3 years, 1948 to 1951. And he was also a member of Muslim League, and this is why he was chosen as the first Prime Minister of Pakistan. So Section 3 is all about the ministries, basically, the political science, the politics of the country. We're going to be talking about the biographies of different leaders, the prime ministers, the presidents, the governor generals, their contributions to the economy, to the industries, to the politics. We'll also study the development of constitutions, the 1956 constitution, the 1960, the 1973. All right, so all of the constitutions in detail. We'll talk about the military rules as well till 1999, the rule of General Pervez Musharraf. So this is all that we're going to cover from Liaquat Ali Khan to General Musharraf. The Liaquat Ali Khan was the first Prime Minister of Pakistan. We're going to study through these questions again, the 4-mark questions first of all, regarding the personalities and the rules that or the contributions that these people made to the country. So Liaquat Ali Khan was a member of Muslim League, and he was chosen as the first Prime Minister. He ruled from 1948 to 51, and he was overthrown in a coup that was planned against him by Major General Akbar Khan. So coups are basically sort of army over when army overthrows a civilian leader. So this is what happened. Liaquat Ali Khan was civilian leader. He was overthrown by army. Major General Akbar Khan planned a coup against him. He was overthrown, but he survived. He wasn't he I mean he was later assassinated in 1951. The place that's known as Liaquat Bagh in Rawalpindi. All right. Prada was it was an act introduced by Liaquat Ali Khan during his time. PRODA. Prada means Public and Representative Officers Disqualification Act. This act, Prada, was implemented to rule out corruption from the officers. So anyone found guilty under Prada was immediately removed from office, and the criteria for these removals were anyone found guilty of corruption would be you could say would be removed under this act Prada. It was made to eliminate dishonesty and corruption, but was later on misused by ruling elites against their political opponents. Okay, so this act, if you just focus on the essence of why this act was implemented, the purpose of Prada was very clear, to remove corruption, and that was a very good step. But because it was misused later on, most of the officers, without being found guilty under Prada, were also removed just under this banner. It was misused again and again for their own interests. So you could say this act was implemented on a very good cause, but because of the misuse, it had to be removed. Was Prada good or bad? Okay, this is just a sort of an analysis. It was initially a good law, but it became the negative use of it made it classify as a useless act. All right. What was Liaquat Nehru Pact? Another contribution of Liaquat Ali Khan was that he signed a pact with Nehru, the Prime Minister of India. Nehru was the first Indian Prime Minister. Liaquat Ali Khan was the first Pakistani Prime Minister. And because in 1947, Pakistan and India were separated, and 1948, Liaquat Ali Khan came into power. This was the time when a lot of refugees were traveling between the two countries. Pakistanis who found themselves living on the wrong side of the border in India had to travel to Pakistan, and Indians who found themselves living in Pakistan had to travel to India. Because you see, when boundaries were announced, Muslim majority areas were given to Pakistan and Hindu majority areas were given to India. So again, majority means yes, that community lives in a greater number in that particular area. But again, a lot of Hindus were living in the Muslim majority areas as well. A lot of Muslims were living in the Hindu majority areas as well. So those people, the minorities of those areas, had to travel to their particular countries. So the Hindus had to migrate to India. The Muslims had to migrate to Pakistan, and the migration caused trouble for the governments. People used to attack each other. A lot of Muslims were attacked while traveling to Pakistan. Hindus were attacked while traveling to India. In order to provide a safe passage to the refugees, this pact was signed, and it was sort of a, you could say, an acceptance of the rights of refugees, the rights of minorities by both of the countries. And it was very important because refugee crisis was actually undermining the economy. Pakistan was newly established. It didn't have enough resources to obviously settle in the refugees in the new country, to provide security and safety to the people traveling. So it was very important to have this collaboration of both of these countries to protect their minorities. Okay. What was the Rawalpindi conspiracy? This was the coup that we were talking about, the coup that was planned to overthrow Liaquat Khan. So army officers were unhappy with this government, and this is why they planned to take over this government and introduce a military rule in the country. Major General Akbar Khan was the commander-in-chief of the staff, and 14 other officers were there with him during this coup. This plan was discovered by Ayub Khan, and Ayub Khan was later arrested because he was also imprisoned because he tried to work against this coup. Liaquat Ali Khan was overthrown, but he survived. He wasn't, I mean, obviously he wasn't killed during this coup. Coups can be very dangerous for the civilian leaders at times. What was the objective resolution? Objective resolution was another, okay, so now we're talking about the struggle of Liaquat Ali Khan in drafting the first constitution of Pakistan. Pakistan was established at this point, but there was no constitution. Government of India Act was being followed during this time of subcontinent after 1935. And you could say as an interim constitution, the Government of India Act was still followed. Now, the problem was that the country needed to have its own constitution. So Liaquat Ali Khan, he basically formed this objective resolution. Objective resolution was the first draft of the constitution, which was presented by the Basic Principles Committee. So number one, his first attempt was to basically form a Basic Principles Committee. Basic Principles Committee's work was to draft a first draft of the constitution. And that first draft was presented in form of an objective resolution. Some of the major points that were there in the first draft were, it marks Allah as the source of all lawmaking and that no law should be made against Islam with the guarantee of fundamental rights of citizens. It was criticized by ulamas for not being pure Islamic. So Islam was declared as the basis for all the laws, all the political laws of the country. Although these measures were taken, it was still criticized by both of the wings, the right wing and the left wings. The ulamas criticized it for not being pure Islamic, and the liberals criticized it for being extremely Islamic. So these were the criticisms that the objective resolution had to face. Okay, what was the Basic Principles Committee? We already know this committee was made to outline the first constitution of Pakistan. It presented the first draft, which was known as the objective resolution. It faced a lot of criticism. Why? Because number one, there were not enough people from the East Pakistan in the Basic Principles Committee. So when Pakistan was divided, let me draw these maps. All the areas of Bengal were also given to Pakistan. All right. So for example, this is all the West Pakistan area, the current Pakistan. All right. And then there was an island which was known as the East Pakistan. All right. So East Pakistan and the West Pakistan had no connection through land. And both of these areas were under Pakistani Federation. So East Pakistan, most of the laws were made in West Pakistan. The capital of the state was in West Pakistan. East Pakistan felt neglected for most of the time. And they obviously criticized and protested against the West Pakistani government for not, because West Pakistanis weren't giving them equal share in the politics of the country. So this resentment caused a lot of problems for the country as well later on. So now in the Basic Principles Committee, East Pakistanis felt that they were not given equal number of seats, and Urdu was made the official language. East Pakistan, most of people of the East Pakistan spoke Bengali at that time, and they wanted Bengali to be the official language, the national language of Pakistan. But since Urdu was declared the national language, they felt attacked culturally, as their language was again ignored. And then this Basic Principles Committee was also criticized by the ulamas because the ulamas thought that the draft that this committee presented was not Islamic. All right, so these were all the developments that were taking place in order to draft a constitution. Now, there's this question. Why was it so difficult to agree on a constitution in 1950? We've seen the problems that these committees, these new developments, all of the government was facing at that time. Number one, opposition by East Pakistan. All of these measures were severely opposed by East Pakistan, whether it be the Basic Principles Committee, the Objective Resolution. The East Pakistanis were not happy about anything at this point in time because of the seats. Number one, they were expecting a greater number of seats in the Basic Principles Committee. Number two, they were wanting Bengali to be the national language. Yeah, so the disagreements between the two wings, it made this development of constitution very difficult for Pakistan. The second reason as to why it was difficult to agree on a new constitution was the opposition by the ulamas. Ulamas and all the religious groups of the country, they criticized the first draft of the constitution. They wanted it to be more Islamic. They wanted the government of Pakistan to be based on the principles of Islam. And this is why they rejected these developments. Number three, opposition by the political leaders. So another problem that the country was facing was that this constitution, the first draft constitution, had given some emergency powers to the head of state. Emergency powers are sort of extraordinary powers given to the president or the prime minister, whoever is the head of state of that time. And under those emergency powers, that particular person, the head of state, is able to remove anyone from power, is able to bring in any person into the power. So these are the emergency powers. So a lot of political leaders oppose these emergency powers, as they thought these powers might be misused by the political leaders later on. And they also wanted provincial autonomy. Most of the provincial governors wanted autonomy instead of federal Jinnah. Preferred a federation, a federal government, a strong central government when Pakistan was initially partitioned. And why was that so? Because it was a newly established state and there was a fear of these conflicts and disagreements. It was important to have a very strong central government that could implement its own laws, and the provinces were to follow all of those the reforms made by the central government. So political leaders, they opposed this because they wanted provincial autonomy. They wanted the provinces to have power. And obviously that was not possible. Giving power to everybody at this point in time was like calling greater troubles onto yourself. The country was newly established. It needed to have these strong rules and regulations. And obviously giving power to everybody, all of the provinces, meant that you were simply causing more disagreements and more internal conflicts. And this is what Jinnah wanted to avoid at any cost, right? So these were the three reasons as to why it was so difficult to agree on a new constitution. Okay, how successful was the ministry of Liaquat Ali Khan during 1948 to 1951? This is a 14-mark question. We've talked about Liaquat Ali Khan as a prime minister. We've talked about his reforms, his contributions, the successes, the failures, the criticisms, and all of these important points. Now you need to analyze all of this and form a 14-mark question: successes and failures. I think you can go for maybe 4 failures and 3 successes, because I don't think this tenure was a success. Because apart from all of the contributions of Liaquat Ali Khan, there were several other problems that the country was facing. The boundary award was unfair. there were crises in Hyderabad. There was a Kashmir issue going on. So we talked about the Hyderabad issue in the previous lecture. It was basically when Hyderabad wanted to join Pakistan. The Nazim Hyderabad wanted to join Pakistan, and it was given to India, although it had a Muslim majority population. There was this crisis going on over there, and Liaquat Ali Khan was not successful in putting down the crisis or convincing the British government to actually give Hyderabad to Pakistan. So the side problems had also caused his tenure to become pretty unstable. This is why I think you should start off by writing 4 failures and then 3 successes. First failure was Prada. Prada initially was a good law, but it was a failure. Why? Because it was misused. Number 2, Disunited Military. There was this coup. Major General Akbar Khan was planning a coup against their own civilian government. So the military was disunited. They did not want a civil military coordination, which is very important to have a successful government. Number 3, Liaquat Ali Khan was not able to make a constitution. He wasn't able to convince the East Pakistanis. He wasn't able to convince the ulamas. There was criticism from all the sides. Therefore, he couldn't draw up a constitution in 1950. Hyderabad issue was also going on. There was no ceasefire. There was, in fact, one ceasefire by the United Nations, but there was no agreement upon that ceasefire later on. The issue, the Kashmir issue still remains. Yeah. So these are all the failures. As far as the successes are concerned, you can talk about the Liaquat-Nehru Pact. It was a success in providing refugees safe passage for travel between the two countries. This visa system was introduced. Refugees had to get a visa to travel from India to Pakistan and Pakistan to India. Then the objective resolution. Okay, this attempt to make a constitution, presenting the first draft was itself a success. Just ignore all the criticisms that the first draft faced, which just having drafted out a constitutional draft, making this attempt to bring out a constitution was a success itself. And then Prada. Implementation of Prada was also a success. Although the outcomes were pretty negative, just the act of bringing Prada into power and trying to remove people guilty of corruption from office was a good initiative. So this is why it was a success. We've discussed 7 points for this question here. Your task for today is to attempt this question. How successful was the ministry of Liaquat Ali Khan from 1948 to 1951? I will be uploading this question as an assignment on the Google Classroom as well. I think you should also attempt this 7-mark question side by side. Why was it so difficult to agree on a new constitution in 1950? I will be uploading, I won't be uploading the notes right now on the group because we still have to cover another ministry in tomorrow's class, the Ghulam Muhammad. So we've discussed all of this. The question will be posted on the Google Classroom with the due date, and you'll be submitting your assignments on the Google Classroom. All right.